everyone to today's webinar. We'll let everyone trickle in here a little bit more, but as we get started, today's conversation is going to be around getting scammed and how not to do it. So the official title of today's webinar is Stay Alert and Avoid Scams. As we get everyone in here, I'm going to go ahead and pull this up. Perfect. So what I'll do here is we'll start with introductions, and rather than, blab on about you guys myself, I'll allow you to introduce yourself a little bit and some of your background, and I'll brag about you some more in a little bit here. But today we've got Tom Britton and Chandavan Fultz here. Lots of expertise between the two of them. Chandavan, if you want to start and give us a little introduction to yourself and your background, that'd be lovely.
I'm Chandavan Fultz. I am a manager for the information security analysts. I've been at Mariner for a little over 3.5 years, but I've been in IT since 2018. I have a bachelor's in cybersecurity, 14 certifications, and have worked in companies as large as over 10,000 people. Tom?
Yeah, Tom Britton. Excited to be here. Starting with the background, my degrees are in information networking and telecommunication. And I also have another degree in psychology. I've been in information systems for 25 years, have been through a lot of different jobs in this area, protecting and defending a lot of different systems and data. I have experience managing and securing networks, systems, technology, databases, and I've worked in companies as employee number 1 and on up to employee number 20,000 plus.
Big differences there. a lot of different people, a lot of different groups. Thank you for sharing some of that background. We'll probably get into more of the experiences that you've seen as we go through the content that we have for today. Today's format, just to get everyone on the same page here, is going to be more of a Q&A conversation format. There's a lot of different topics that we can cover within the cybersecurity, the safety sphere. We want to make sure that it's something that works for everybody and that's digestible. So we're going to be talking through a number of questions and answers, which also means that we'd love for you to submit your own questions and we'll answer them. So feel free to use the Q&A throughout the conversation today. We will make sure to answer them as time allows. One of the things we want to make sure is clear is the terminology. We won't go through all of the terms line by line here, but if you do have questions on terms that you're not clear on that may get used, let us know in the Q&A, and we'll make sure to clarify anything that may get missed. But we've got a lot of terms. There are a lot of terms in this sphere that can get a little confusing. We will make sure that as these terms come, we are explaining them so that some of the confusion gets dispelled so that everybody's on the same page here. We got a couple different pages here worth of terminology that we'll be going over today, but do not fear, we will make sure that everyone is up to speed by the end of the conversation today. So I'll go ahead and I'll stop sharing here. And what we'll do is we'll get right into some of the Q&A here. Now, looking at the first question that we've got here, we've got a number of different questions that we'll be covering today. One of the first is regarding steps that individuals can take to lock down their internet presence to help stay out of reach of scammers. So to rephrase, what can we do? What can we do to keep ourselves safe and lock down that internet presence? Because it really does feel like once you're on the internet, it's everywhere. Right? So what can we do to secure that a little bit more for ourselves?
So the first thing that you can do is using multi-factor authentication. So this is a security measure that requires a user to provide one more method to verify your identity and your accounts and systems. This actually protects against 99.9% of account takeovers, as noted by Microsoft. So one thing to keep in mind with that is that not all authentication factors are created equal. So this one's called TOTP, time-based one-time password. That one is more secure than your SMS and email counterpart, as those can be easily spoofed. Tom?
Yeah, one of my favorite tips is just kind of like Dylan noted, once you're on the internet, it seems to be everywhere, is to be mindful of your digital footprint. And what that is, your digital footprint are the artifacts left around the web based on your online activity. These could be something as simple as a book review, a product review. They could be a social media profile, or they could be in some surprise cases, financial transactions in some, for example, peer-to-peer payment applications that may overshare a little bit more than we'd like to. So inherently, a digital footprint isn't good or bad, but you do want to be aware of it. You want to go into those social media profiles, check your settings. They're usually in plain English these days, but take a look at those, make sure they align with your comfort level. Another one of my big favorite tips is to use a password manager. Password Manager is an application that's designed to securely store your usernames and passwords in a way that's hard to compromise, but easy for you to access if you want to access it in maybe another application like a web browser. And what this does is kind of offload the cognitive load, if you will, of keeping separate passwords for separate sites. One of the big risks in modern times is that we typically think of a hacker or a threat actor as taking over a system, breaking into something. Frequently now, what is happening is a website from ABC company is getting compromised, and the threat actors are taking those data dumps, sharing them or selling them among themselves, and then taking those credentials from one site and going to all of the others and accessing those and seeing if your password matches. With a password manager, you kind of offload that burden of remembering the passwords. You store those in a password manager, and that lets you, again, have a unique password for every single site without having the burden of having to remember those. And it'll even auto-populate them for you in many cases. It has supporting functionality such as helping you generate a secure password for each site that's not easily guessable. So again, offloading a little bit of that load from your brain to the application so that you can have a truly random password. And they're building on additional features such as notifications if your password for any of these sites is in a known data breach. So a lot of good things it does for you. So that's one of my favorite tips.
That's great. Now, there's been first over a dozen questions that have come in so far. So we're off to a great start. Lots of engagement here. And just to give everyone that's participating today some context as well from a big picture perspective, this is a really common concern. In fact, based on Norton Antivirus, some of the research they've done, more than 78% of consumers are specifically concerned about their data privacy and their security. So this is nigh on universal, and a lot of the questions are reflecting that as well. So speaking of password managers, one of the main questions are, why should we trust a password manager? Can we trust a password manager? Are they the type of thing that, for example, when we look at the context of major corporations getting hacked, it seems on a monthly basis, it kind of comes and goes in waves where we seem to have waves of these hacks go through and these data breaches. Why should we trust password managers?
Good question. There are a lot of safeguards in password managers that are not in, for example, a general purpose document. You can password protect a Word document or an Excel spreadsheet, but the bar is lower to decrypt those and get into the content. With a password manager, frequently they have controls such as the password manager company doesn't even have access to your data. So it's encrypted in a way that only you have access to it, and only you and either your encryption key along with your password plus a multi-factor is able to access that content. So the bar is a little higher. There's always a good, better, best scenario. If you're going to do anything, you want to save it externally. You want to have that protected by encryption or a password. I think the best option is the password manager at this point. Does that help?
Yeah, it does. So one of the other questions is, when we're looking at password managers, are there any password managers that we could potentially recommend? Obviously, not from a Mariner recommendation standpoint, just from personal experience. What works best?
So the major players, if you go with any of those, there's LastPass, there's 1Password. Proton now has a password manager. there's a number of others. If you're going with one of the top tier solutions, you're going to be pretty much okay with that. From there on, it's more, your personal preference. Maybe one has a feature that you really like that makes your life easier, that another one doesn't. At that point, you're getting into preference, but you've set that bar high, and now your safety level is a little bit higher because of it.
That's great. Janavon, anything to add to that?
No, Tom got it. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, that's perfect. Now, when we're looking at the type of phishing that we've been talking about, we've talked about this somewhat indirectly, but we'll jump into it. We're talking email now, right? Because that's typically one of the more common places that people are getting quote unquote hacked, where their information is getting stolen and reused. Can you walk through some of the key items that we should be paying attention to and evaluating in order to avoid these types of phishing scams?
Yeah. So the first place to start is reviewing your email links. So you can actually hover over the link with your cursor and see where that link's being pointed at. So one thing is, like, if an example is to look into, if you're expected to go to a retail website and it displays like a different website, chances are it might be a red flag. So avoid clicking it. Another thing is odd subject lines. So keep an eye out for ones that don't look right or don't make sense. And then scammers often use like misspellings, grammatical errors, and poorly structured sentences. So some of these can be human error, but it can also be a sign of fraudulent activity. So if it doesn't sound right, maybe look into it a little more. Another thing is a lot of emails have attachments. There's actually, most email services have a preview option that you can actually preview the document without actually downloading it. So that way you can access it, get your information that you need, and don't even have to put it on your computer. Another thing is to review the content. So ensure that what is being requested is expected and normal. And then another thing to look out for is if the request is urgent, that's another sign. So this is a tactic that they use to put their user or their victim into a panic state and then coax them into doing something wrong.
That's great. I've been doing this in the financial advisory industry for about a decade now. And the amount of times that I've seen clients at other firms and Mariner as well that get these calls or these emails saying, you need to do this right now, whether it's, your family member's in trouble or something that sounds, when we talk about it, ridiculous, but when you get the phone call, it feels very real. It's the FBI, right? It's the police department. It's some IRS, something like that. It's a government body. And it sounds really scary, and they can be pretty convincing on the phone sometimes, which can be really intense. But I think that's really great advice, is making sure that, okay, the more urgent it is, or the more emotional the request is, more often than not, the more fake it's likely to be. That's great. So when in doubt, slow down is what I'm hearing.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. Anything you'd like to add to that, Tom?
Yeah, that's great. If it's my rule of thumb, if it doesn't look right, it probably isn't in the online world. And that sense of urgency, that invoking of an authority figure, you mentioned the FBI, the IRS, those are all things you want to tune into. It may be, it also may not be, but just have that healthy level of skepticism as you go into that transaction and decide whether or not you want to interact with that content.
That's great. And on that note, there's been a lot of questions coming in around the dark web and around how to handle kind of putting the genie back in the bottle when you find your information has been broadcast, whether on the dark web or otherwise. One thing, just as a note, as we look at terminology, the dark web is one thing that has a lot of connotations around it. So to read off of the Scaminology worksheet that we've got here, to define dark web. The dark web is part of the internet that is not indexed by search engines and requires special software or configurations to access, often used for illegal activities. Now, the assumption is always that it's going to be nefarious, but really when we look at the term, it's just things that aren't being directly indexed, but because they're not being directly indexed, there's a lot less oversight, which is why a lot of the nefarious and illegal activities tend to occur there. So looking at the dark web, a lot of the questions have been around, I found my information through X, Y, and Z service. They said that my information, my social, everything is in the dark web. How do I fix that? What are steps that I can take? And I know the dark web's a pretty big topic, so you guys let me know, is this something that we can get some answers for today?
Yeah, I think,
Sorry, go for Tom.
yeah, I can take a stab at this and then turn it over to you. In general, it's hard to put that genie back in the bottle. Knowing about it is a good step. Taking all your usual precautions is a really good step. You do want identity theft insurance from somewhere. Most of us have received those emails, and we are able to get those free because our address was part of some other data incident. So that's another step you can take. And I would go back to the healthy level of skepticism. That information is used to build a profile on you and then potentially perpetrate some kind of attack. And if you're aware of that possibility, you're much better off going into any interaction or online activity than you were if you didn't know about it. So Karen, I'll send it back over to you.
Another thing that I've noticed too is a lot of folks have been using like credit monitoring services just to make sure no additional lines are opening up. There's things like Identity Shield as well that was, I believe, built to notify you when these happen. Unfortunately, it's not an uncommon thing. So just filtering and screening what you're being requested and if it makes sense for your current situation is always a good approach to go at it.
That's great. Thanks, guys. Appreciate that. Dark web can be a bit of a rabbit hole to get into. So that's great to get some clarity on some of those items. So next question that we've got coming up here, after we've talked through email, what are some ways that you have seen or heard of individuals getting scammed, and how can we avoid those attacks this holiday season?
So I can go over a couple. One that we're seeing a lot of is the remote support scam. A person is contacted unsolicited by a company they may or may not know of. They could be impersonating a financial institution or a large tech firm. And the request from that individual is to allow them onto their computer. The attacker then remote controls their computer and performs some action, such as installing malware, or directs the user to log into a site that may capture their credentials or just give them access to that site. So back to the healthy level of skepticism, think about that company. I've been contacted by large tech companies, in quotes, and I just know their support is not that good because I've reached out to them before and had to wait on hold for hours and even pay them to get support. It's highly unlikely that they're going to call me out of the blue and offer me support. So does the activity match the profile, basically? So that's one of the ones we see a lot of. So Karen, do you want to go over some of yours?
Yeah. So a lot of the ones I've seen are like SMS related, so text messages. We get what I'm seeing is a lot of false text from scammers posing to be shipping companies or known retailers. So they'll send a link and want you to confirm your address or your personal information. Another thing is like duplicate order notices. For current events, I'm seeing a lot of stuff taking advantage of the election. So smishing campaigns regarding donations to political parties are popping up. And then another big one is impersonation attempts. So if you're getting a text message request from your CEO that's wanting some gift cards, it's probably not right. A good thing.
I've gotten a lot of those. A lot of those.
And then, so if you do encounter a smish, you have an option to report it through your carrier. I'm seeing it both available on Android and iPhone. So definitely take advantage of that because that'll send it back to the company and they can block it on their end.
Now, beyond just some of what I might consider the more obvious ones, like, hey, our CEO, Marty Bicknell, texts me and says, hey, Dylan, I need you to go to the store right now, buy 42 gift cards for $100 each. I need you to do it ASAP and mail it to me at this address that has no connection to me whatsoever. Okay. Right. Those seem a little, okay, maybe that's not Marty. Right. For others, where it's simply a link or a download of some sort, one of the questions that comes up is, well, why that? Why is it that they really want me to click this link? They're not asking me to buy gift cards. They're not even asking me to put in bank information. What are they getting out of me if I click on this link or I download this thing that they asked me to download?
So oops, sorry.
One thing is, is this a live individual that will interact with a communication? So that link could and probably does link to a website that's under the attacker's control. So if they get a click on that, they know they have a valid phone number and they can, the value of that information is higher in their world. The other part is it could actually be some sort of malware dropper. So if you click that on your computer, it could attempt to install malware, or on your phone, it could attempt some sort of action that you wouldn't want to happen. Open an app with, a URI that does something in an application that they want access to. So sorry, I kind of interrupted there. Go ahead, Karen.
No worries. Another thing is like session hijacking. So it might be trying to steal like cookies or another like little security key that helps you get into this website and then just kind of does it for them. It really just depends on the content.
And to clarify one term here, malware is, as the name suggests, bad software, stuff where we don't want, right? Mm-hmm. And for the most part, it's designed to either steal information from or damage a computer system or a phone or whatever device it is that you're using.
Right? It could also be a backdoor into your devices. So it could be like something that could poise you to be part of like a zombie fleet. So that's pretty much, in fact, like machines that threat actors can utilize their resources in so that they can drop off their payload depending on the attack.
That sounds intense.
Yeah.
Don't want to be part of a zombie fleet. That does not sound good. Does not sound enjoyable. Now, as far as the phone specifics, there were a number of questions that came in about that, and we'll get to those in just a moment. But one of the questions is, when we're looking like malware like this, when we're looking at texts, is for those types of text messages, can they take over your phone, or is it just limited to accessing information or using it as like a zombie fleet? What are they able to actually accomplish there?
So there are vectors or paths into a device that will allow them to take over it to some degree. So yeah, that is a possibility. I will tell you, a phone is a little bit harder than a computer to take over, but yeah, that is out there. It's in the realm of possibility, and it does happen.
Mm-hmm.
So let's jump into it. I'm gonna skip around a little bit. We're gonna improv. When we're looking at smartphone security, one of the big questions that is on a lot of people's minds, and that we saw a lot of as we were preparing for this, is, well, how do we protect our phones? What are the best ways to ensure that our smartphones are secure and, we're not dropping the kids off and clicking on something on accident and then, oops, there goes my life. What do we do?
That's a good question. So the first thing you can do is enable device encryption. So this is actually available for both Android and iPhone. So it actually activates when you activate your PIN code or your lock. So it's either like Face ID or thumbprint ID. For computers, you can use Windows device encryption or like BitLocker, and then the Mac equivalent's called FileVault. That can be enabled in the settings. To ensure that your devices are current and up to date on software is a really big plus. Just because same for your applications too, because these can easily get vulnerable. So you want to make sure that you're accepting all of these updates. Another thing is to back up your device. So use a service like Google Drive, iCloud, Windows Backup, or even like an external hard drive. This is really handy if your device it becomes lost or stolen or even damaged, so that you can actually reclaim your old files.
And I might add that as you're out and about, don't just scan any QR code that you might see on a sticker on a wall in a public place. That could lead to unexpected, unwanted consequences. And I would also reiterate, keep those devices up to date with your provider's latest software.
And from what I understand, and layperson here, so you can correct me, a lot of those updates, part of the reason they're so important is because the providers themselves, like Apple, Samsung, different carriers, Verizon, so on, are constantly updating their software to account for new types of attacks to keep their users safe. And if we're not updating, we're missing a safety net that otherwise we would have available.
Yes.
Great. Now, when we're talking about traveling, so we've talked about smartphones, we're taking our phones with us, we're going abroad, we're traveling, we're not on a normal network. What are some of the things that we should be aware of or actions that we can take to make sure that we're reducing risk as we're traveling and we're using networks that we're not typically accessing?
So I can take a shot at this one. Usually what comes up is the public Wi-Fi access. If you're out and about, you have a need to connect to do something. As always, you want to keep track of your device. Don't leave it unattended. But with public Wi-Fi networks, those have a number of risks. One of those is that Wi-Fi network could be an attacker impersonating as public Wi-Fi, and their intention is to collect your data and do bad things with it. Another is that a legitimate Wi-Fi network may have an attacker on it who's eavesdropping or intercepting traffic. So typically, the best option is to stay on your cellular data connection. If you have a device along with you, maybe a computer or a tablet that you need to use to access the internet, try to use your cellular phone's hotspot connection. That's going to be your best option. If you have to access a public Wi-Fi, you absolutely need that access. You can either use a VPN, which encrypts that traffic and prevents tampering with it, and that will protect it from eavesdroppers. Or if you just need to hop on to look up something, try to avoid your critical services. Don't access your banking info from it. Don't access your work account from it. Try to stay away from things that you want to protect.
That's great. And so, and just as well, another term to clarify here, when we're talking about encryption, what does that really encapsulate? Because you see in movies and TV all the time, it's, encryption turns into a bit of a magical term, much like hacking, where hacking is not often, I'm hacking into the mainframe. It's these phishing scams that we're talking about for the most part. What is encryption? What does it really entail?
So I can give and then Tom can kind of add on to it. So I guess in layman's terms, it essentially kind of locks your data into a vault that is protected by a bunch of different algorithms. Like Tom.
Yeah, it's one of those. As you asked that, Dylan, I was thinking, gosh, I work with that every day, but I don't think of the definition ever. But, if you ever had a coded message when you were a kid, you substitute letters, you send it to a friend, and they decode it on their side. Encryption is kind of that on steroids. It's a lot of sophisticated math algorithms that I don't understand. There's a lot of terms flying around: symmetric, asymmetric encryption, public key infrastructure. There's a lot going on behind the scenes. The benefit to you and I as we use encryption is one, the traffic is all mathematically validated on both sides between your device and the server or the other device. And the first thing it does is it lets both sides know that the data hasn't been tampered with. The other part is it keeps it secret, just like those basic ciphers do that we did when we were kids. Um, it's a dynamic mathematic algorithm on each side. And while we don't validate it, the applications on our phones and our computers validates it, and it'll throw an error up if it's being tampered with. We've all seen probably certificate errors on websites where maybe that certificate expired, that encryption certificate expired, and we get a little pop-up that says this website is not protected. So, our browsers and our phones, they're doing a lot of work for us in this area. But I think you and I, as what we want to remember is that, it's going to keep it secret, protect it from eavesdropping, and it's also going to keep it, keep the integrity so it's not tampered with in between the true intended recipients. Does that help a little bit?
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. I mean, from what I'm hearing is it makes it much, much more difficult to access the information unless you have permissions and direct access to the information, as well as verifying the entrance and exit of that information, that it's all valid and really should be there.
Right. And I like that you said much more difficult, because typically in the industry, we kind of assume nothing is 100%. But there's good, better, best, and the encryption that was prominent 10 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago, is probably not good enough for today. So it's constantly evolving. It's an interesting area.
Now, a couple of follow-up questions that have come through in regards to this subject of networks and VPNs. One is, are there any VPNs that could be recommended?
So I try to not get into products specifically, but again, if you're doing a web search and you're going to one of those top 3 or 5, you're going to be with someone who's doing a good job for you.
Are there any types of VPNs that should be avoided?
So yeah, the fringe ones, if it's, number 45 on your website search, you probably want to stay away from that. If it's free, take a second look.
Yeah.
I tend to go with paid services over free services because there's a little more accountability there. They're more established, and it's just generally better than a free one. They've got more funds to support the product, active development. If they're offering it for free, there's a chance that you might be the product. In other words, if you're not paying for it,
You're paying for it somehow.
Yeah, ads or something, data mining on your data. So as a rule of thumb, they're not all like this, but as a rule of thumb, you want to try to go with a paid service.
And one of the comments here, which is a great one, you guys can add any flavor to this if you'd like, was that a lot of home routers now have VPN enablement as part of the service with the routers and with providers too. So there are options that are built in to be a little more consumer friendly now than maybe when VPNs first came out, and it was very much a more difficult endeavor to try and apply that. Now, another question that came in is when we're talking about antivirus software, a lot of questions about the viability and the actual protection that's really coming through these things like Norton Antivirus and others. How much are they really protecting? It sounds like, and this is the question/statement that we received, is it sounds like these antivirus software checkers really aren't doing much on a lot of the phishing and smishing and things that we're talking about. So what are they actually good for?
So I can start with that. So if you're perusing the internet, they can help for known malware and known vulnerabilities. So maybe not vulnerabilities, but known malware. So if you access a website, accidentally download something, or you download what you think is like a true installer, and you find out that it's fake, if it's known, then they can either compare the hash or compare the activity of the file and then prevent that from further infecting your machine. Another thing is, depending on the antivirus, if it detects or sees unusual activities. So in this case, I'm going to use an example. If a file is recreating itself and deleting itself and moving to different places, it can see that activity and flag it, and then most likely kill and quarantine its activities. So this is a way to prevent infection. Keep in mind that these databases need to get updated, so the newest, latest, and greatest attack might not be stopped just yet until they can get the data. Anything to add on to this one, Tom?
Yeah, I would add a little bit. I wouldn't say they're ineffective. Like Karen said, they will get all the known entities. They have heuristics that'll let them detect malicious behavior, even if it might not be an actual known piece of malware yet. There's always a bit of a cat and mouse scenario there because attackers are always recrafting their things to try to get around the antivirus. But I would say that a little bit of evidence of their effectiveness is the fact that many attackers are going for the softer target, which is you and I, the humans, which is why social engineering is so prevalent. And these phishing ruses, they're not malware. They're just language. So trying to talk you and I into making a mistake or a bad decision. So I would say, yeah, they're very effective. I would definitely say it's something you want to have on your computers and your devices. But like many things, it's like we mentioned earlier, nothing's 100%. You always want to have that layers of protection.
That's great. Thank you for that. Those are great additional notes for everyone to follow and keep safe. One of the last things that we want to make sure to address here, and this is a pretty hot topic. We'll try and be as specific as possible with a lot of this, but this is another subject that can get magical, mystical a little bit. And the question is around AI. So when we're looking at AI, it's basically a twofold question. Is one, what are the risks to using AI in cybersecurity as a consumer? And then two, how has AI changed the landscape as far as internet safety and protection?
I can take this one. So it's interesting. There are some things that are unique to AI and some things that are not unique to AI. So just remember, as you're interacting with these services, large language models and generative AI services, it's an online service just like everything else. So it's running in a data center, maybe in another part of the world, definitely on someone else's server or computer. So you want to take the normal precautions that you take if you're not terribly comfortable with the service. Maybe hold back information. Maybe not share your financial information or medical information with that. So that's not specific to AI, but just general online services. The other part is as far as risks to using it, and this is kind of a public service announcement, they are prone to what's called hallucination. And what that means is they are large language models. They're going to surround the text that you give it with probably the text that's probably going to surround that text. So it can make things up that look very plausible. Just be sure you're aware of that, checking facts if you're going to reuse them or relay them. So you mentioned the landscape, Dylan, and that is something that's interesting because the threat landscape is changing a little bit. We can still use the traditional cues that we've used, such as typos, grammar mistakes, to kind of suss out something that looks suspicious. But it's changing a little bit because now AI lets someone who wants to do harm, it lets them be a little more culturally aware, contextual aware, and things look a little more polished. They can increase their effectiveness to a much greater degree than they were before. So while you always want to look for, messages that are all caps, that have a sense of urgency, it's going to get a little harder. And especially as we go into this holiday season, a lot of online activity is going to peak. And we want to be super aware of that, have our senses amped up, ready to detect those, have our healthy level of skepticism as we go through this. So hopefully that addresses a little bit of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And Shannon, did you have anything else that you would like to add to that as well?
No, Tom covered that. Thank you.
That's great. From sort of a more, again, layperson here, but experience that I've had with clients, even very recently, where some of these phishing attacks and deep fakes can get pretty intense, where they're mimicking loved ones, whether it's through text messages or it's actual phone calls where voices are being mimicked and you're receiving a call from a loved one. It's not an email from a Nigerian prince, it's a call from Uncle Bob, and he's in the hospital and it sounds like him, walks like him, talks like him, kind of thing. What do we do with that? That sounds like a very sophisticated situation to be stuck in. How do we protect ourselves from that sort of a phishing scam?
So a good way to start is to see where the number is coming from. If Uncle Bob's calling from an 800 number or like a 99 out of country number, but he's known to be in the States, that might be something to look out for. Another thing is if you are skeptical, follow up with a family member. You can confirm their situation or just kind of verify the data that way. Tom, any other items to add on?
No, the alternate channel is a good one, and I've been in contact with people who have sussed out attackers in this way, just by calling someone else in the family and saying, "Hey, is so and so with you right now?" So a little bit of common sense there, and a little bit of skepticism. I know people who have a passphrase that they'll use for emergency situations. That's an option as well. So yeah, and the services I've looked into that do this, they're pretty good, but they're still not perfect. So I think we have a little ways to go on that, but still, it's probably not too far off. And just have that skepticism, validate, have that extra line of communication that you can use.
That's great. And speaking of some of these services, there were a number of questions that came in around things like LifeLock. Some of these services that report to do quite a bit to restore your personal information and security. And again, not to get into specific product recommendations, but how reliable can these services be, and should they even be services that we really rely on?
So you should probably never rely on one service totally, but I know I've had family members who have had issues in this area, and they've actually come through for them. And some are better than others, but I think in general, it's a very good thing to have. And just make sure you're checking out the provider, and they're reputable, and just be cautious with it. Same with identity theft insurance. There's a lot of players in this market now. Do your research, make sure it's one of the top tier ones, and pay a little extra if you have to.
Right. That's great. And to reiterate some of the payment piece, just to we've talked about it a couple of times, but if you don't know how you're paying, you're going to end up paying some other way. So always make sure that you know how you're paying so that you keep yourself safe and you don't end up paying a lot more in the long run than you were trying to avoid in the short term. And speaking of money, credit is another question that's come up a lot. And we've got a couple more Q&A questions I want to make sure we hit on before we get to the end here. A lot of the questions were around credit freezes. How effective are these? Should they be a tool that is used to protect information? Can you speak to that?
So yeah, it is a very effective way. Again, nothing's 100%, but it is one thing that if you think about the attackers and what they are trying to do, they are going to try to find the lowest hanging fruit, the easiest target. And just like if you have one of those security signs in your front yard that says protected by whatever company, surveillance by whoever, an attacker might look at that and just move on to the next house. So the trick is to make it a little more difficult, hopefully a lot more difficult, and hope that attacker moves on to somebody, maybe an easier, not good to say, but an easier target, hopefully not one of us. But yeah, they're effective, I would say.
It's great. Now, to wrap things up here, we've gotten through most of the questions that we had today. And again, thank you to everyone for all your questions. We had close to 100 total questions that came through today. So lots of engagement, lots of questions. Seems like this has been something very important for everybody. As a note as well, before we get to the end here, all of this will be made available as well after the webinar today. There will be links sent out to everybody, so make sure to stay tuned for that. But as we get to the end here and we start winding down, I'd love to hear any additional thoughts from both of you on general takeaways or key points that you would like to make sure that everyone walks away from it, having gone through the litany of information we have today. What would you want people to make sure that they remember as they walk away from the conversation today?
Yeah, a good place to start is to use a password manager, enable MFA wherever possible, be mindful of your digital footprints. So just limit what information you share online and just be cautious where you use your email. Maintain a healthy level of skepticism. And then if it doesn't look right, chances are it's probably not right. And then always kind of report that malicious activity. That way you're helping out your friend or your cousin.
And I would say that as we encounter the holiday season, a lot of online shopping is going to happen, and a lot of threat actors are going to be out there trying to get in the game. And just again, keep that level of skepticism high. Karen mentioned the digital footprints, and I also think a good level of curiosity is in order. Go into your social media profile, check those privacy settings, make sure they line up with your comfort level. Try to maybe not publish your travel plans if you have those, unless you really need to, because those can be used as a clue for someone out there to know where you are or where you are not at. And so that could be used to either cause harm to you or a family member or even your employer. So a lot of good stuff, Karen. Thank you.
Thanks.
That's great. Well, that's it for today. Chanavon, Tom, thank you so much for your time and for your expertise. It's been very valuable. And to everyone who participated in today's conversation, thank you for your questions. We're glad to have been able to give you the answers. If you have any further questions, please feel free to reach out. If you have advisors with Mariner, of course, you can reach out to your advisors and we'll provide you any and all resources we have available. If you don't have an advisor currently, give us a call. We'd be more than happy to talk through any potential assistance that you need as well. So again, thank you all for your time today and enjoy the rest of your week.